Tune in to this week's on.net, where I have two of my best friends in the entire world on talking about serverless compute with Azure Functions v4 for .NET developers. So tune in. Hey everyone, I'm James Montemagno, and we're back with another on.net today. Honestly, my favorite topic of all time, serverless compute with Azure Functions. And I brought two of my most favorite people in the entire world from the Azure Functions team, Matthew and Fabio. How's it going, guys?
Doing well.
Doing great.
Now, I've been working with Fabio for probably like 55 years at this point, and we're sort of best friends. But many people may not know exactly what you, Fabio, and Matthew work on. So how about we do quick intros? Fabio, what do you do here at the Microsofts and the Functions team?
Sure. So I'm on the Azure Functions team. I manage a team, a group of people responsible primarily for the host runtime environment and the .NET experience in Functions.
And how about you, Matthew?
Yeah, I'm a PM on the Functions team. I jump around on what I work on, but security identity features, sometimes hosts, sometimes extensions. It kind of just depends. And I think some of the history here is like, the Functions team is in some senses like an offshoot of the mobile services team. There was a chunk of us that went over there, so we have a lot of shared history, I guess, going back through a lot of that.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, what you may not know, the two of you, is that I actually am one of the biggest super fans of Azure Functions of all time. I actually, inside of work and outside of work, run so much of what I do every single day on Azure Functions. Last year, or at the beginning of the pandemic, I really got into Animal Crossing on the Nintendo Switch. And if either of you play Animal Crossing, or maybe your kids do, or friends do, there's this little stock like a turnip stalk.
Yep.
And like prices go up and down. So I actually built an app called Island Tracker that you can do social turnip tracking prices for iOS and Android with your friends. So there's an invite system. Everything is 100% powered by Azure Functions and Azure Table Storage, 100%. So there's no servers, at all, anything like that. I didn't spin up any backends because I'm a mobile developer, right? I'm not a web developer. I'm not but everything is 100% there with like these beautiful integrations here and there. And I got so into Functions that actually at Azure Serverless Conf, like last year, John on my team talked about how we power our entire team's automation, workflow, analytics 100% with Azure Functions at any given time right now. Like you just wait 5 seconds. I bet I have an Azure function being triggered to pull statistics from YouTube or from some dashboard or from some database, and it's piping into all this stuff. I love it. I love everything about it.
Love it.
And yet, you guys are doing so many awesome, cool things. I know nothing about V4 at all, but for me, I don't know if I pitched Azure Functions good. Did I miss anything from the sales pitch of Azure Functions for developers?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the focus less on the servers and more on what you're actually trying to do, right? Like you want to build an app, you want to build that experience. That's where your time investment is best spent. We don't want you to have to, be futzing with all sorts of random things that are, back-end web dev that are just kind of like taxes for you to just get that task done. So the goal is to make it so that you're only writing, code in the cloud that is actually what you need to and nothing else.
Yeah.
It's also about scale, right? I think some people think about it as like on demand. Is that a way of thinking about Functions?
It is. And it's one of the things that I was going to say. We know you build great mobile apps. So you should expect that you're going to see a lot of people using them. And that it's nice that you don't have to worry about that demand, right? You don't have to worry about planning for capacity, dealing with the peaks, dealing with how many users are coming in, how many times those APIs are getting called. Functions is managing all of that for you. And with your background, it's managing all of that for you and giving you a development experience that aligns with it. It leverages the skills that you bring, right? You're a .NET developer. You know how to use .NET. If you write at home in Visual Studio, and Functions tries to leverage that and reuse a lot of those skills. And I think some of what we want to talk about today is the kinds of investments that we're making to make that experience have even more fidelity with what you would expect from .NET development experience running a web app or a console app, for instance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What I'm used to so far is going into Visual Studio, create a new function, and I have just like, a class with a method that's like function one, and I write some code and there's some inputs and outputs. I think we've demoed it, on previous on.NET episodes. That's what I'm traditionally used to, but I believe that was more of the traditional model. But as the show title describes, we're on V4. So I might not even know and understand a lot of what's new. And so, is that still the model that developers are used to and are using today? Or is there different paradigms to help developers use functions more efficiently?
It is still a model that is fully supported, that we keep investing in, and it has seen a lot of enhancements or some changes from V3 to V4. The key thing that happened for .NET developers with that model was really the support for .NET 6. So if you're talking about .NET specifically, and you talk about what we refer to as the improc model, that's the traditional model where you're deploying essentially an assembly, a class library that has your function definitions that gets hosted in the Azure Functions environment. So it's loaded up dynamically, and it's running within the host. We are invoking your code and giving you all the nice little binding features and things that give you out-of-the-box integration with some services that you may be using on Azure or outside of Azure. That model still exists, fully supported, something that we intend to continue supporting in functions. But we have shortly before the V4 release, this is actually not tied to V4, we introduced a new development model for functions, or execution model that has a slightly different development experience, which we believe is a little better aligned with the rest of the .NET ecosystem. And we call that the .NET isolated model. And it's called isolated primarily because of the fact that it's no longer running inside of the host. It's running in its own process, which is, by the way, a process that you have full control of, which is one of the things that a lot of .NET customers complained about, and they wanted better access to how they bootstrap the process and what kind of dependencies they're bringing in. That gives them that flexibility. It also gives them the flexibility to decide on what version of .NET they want to target for their payload. Traditionally, with the model that we had in functions prior to the isolated model introduction, the only option you had was really to run on the version of .NET that the host was running. So you were dependent on us. You're dependent on functions adopting a new version of .NET as it becomes available for you to be able to take advantage of that. And that's no longer the case with the isolated model.
Yeah, the isolation is not just like out of process, like process isolation. It's also you're isolated from the changes on our end to a certain extent. Like if you want to just upgrade a .NET version, that doesn't mean taking a set of breaking changes for functions as a whole, or the other way around too. Like in theory, a new version were to come along, you'd be able to take a recently supported worker forward as well.
Got it. So is this change actually kind of in parallel to how .NET has changed, right? If we think how we went from framework and installing the .NET framework and ensuring it's on the machine, and you have to align versions to .NET Core, where really like .NET is the runtime is like part of your application, right? It's like it's bundled in. Is that how developers should think of this model? Is sort of like that one is a framework approach versus not a framework approach, or no? Or
that's one thing. That's one way to think about it. I think that the key thing that we, if I was to just summarize these very quickly, we are really decoupling your payload from the functions host environment.
Okay.
That's the key thing. There is that there were a lot of limitations, a lot of requirements that you were required to kind of understand some of the environment restrictions and what was in place there. And we are removing a lot of the coupling that existed before.
It might be like helpful to just like highlight some of the things that you could do now that were maybe a little bit harder. Like you want to control serialization all the way through. That's not something you could do when our system was sitting there also having to deal with how some of those things work. If you want to use system text JSON instead of JSON.NET, yeah, sure, go for it. Like that's an option. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of exciting about the isolated model is like you are in control of main. You have a full pipeline that you can set up. Like you can do a lot more, and you're not fighting against some other piece of infrastructure that's all part of that.
So you sort of remove some of the dependencies as well that the developers are forced upon when they installed the Azure Functions SDK. I do remember that. I think that's a good point that you brought up, Matthew, is I remember at some point like newtonsoft.json would update, but I had to wait for a new version of functions or like kind of move for it to take that dependency, and it was locked in. So that is completely gone now. So I'm in control of my dependencies, my code. You just run it.
That's right. That's right. And for the host, yeah, there were a lot of dependencies, particularly framework like .NET dependencies. They are unified by the host to make sure that we have a common set of types. So because there is a lot of type exchange between the host and your function when you deploy that as a class. With the autoproc model and that decoupling that has taken place there, like you are in full control of your dependency graph, right? All of the dependencies that you're bringing in as part of your application.
Now, what are some of the other benefits of this? Like, is there performance implications? Is there cost saving implications that's involved if I was to go to this new isolated model?
So there are some differences, and we have documentation to compare the two models. So I would encourage anyone trying to explore these to look at the docs first, see if this is right for you based on where we are today. So this is an area that we'll continue to invest very heavily in the coming months and years. Our goal is to really provide parity when it comes to capabilities with what you had in proc. Right now, if we look at the current state, and you compare the two things, there are a lot of the pros that we described here, but there are some limitations with the autoproc model as well. Performance is one of the areas where you may see an impact when you move autoproc. So there is a slight throughput impact, as well as a cold start impact when you move to autoproc. So there is a bit of a trade-off between the flexibility you get with a new model and the performance you would see from the application. A lot of that is mitigated by the scaling behavior of functions. So you don't get the impact is not as severe as you may expect by moving something out of proc, but there is some of that there. Another limitation that is worth talking about is what we a lot of times hear people referring to as rich bindings or SDK bindings, and it is really the ability for you to say you're working with storage, and it's very easy in functions for you to say, hey, I don't want to learn this SDK. I don't want to do anything directly with the SDK. I just want to take a stream, or I just want to take a cloud blob type. And the functions, the host will do its magic and then give you an instance of that type directly from the trigger. Some of those types, there are some limitations on what you have the ability to bind to with the autoproc model. And again, we have documentation outlining the differences and what is supported. But this is something that we are actually actively investing in to close that gap and bring those experiences bring parity to the experience we had in proc. But yeah, there are some of those are some of the key differences. Anything I forgot to mention here, Matthew? I don't know.
I mean, there's some scenarios I think around HTTP streaming and things like that are a little different. But yeah, overall, that's the thing. SDK type bindings is one that I think a lot of people see just because it's literally something you would see in your code.
Yeah.
And so that's like a very visible difference, I think. But again, we are working to close it. And also, I can't let it pass. Like Cloud Blob, Fabio, we're using the extensions v5. We've got Blob Client available. It's so much nicer.
It is you're absolutely right. It is, but it is one of the common examples. It is one of the common asks that we see from people out there.
Yeah, I just never want to have to say that because I always trip over Cloud Blob. I think I got it that time.
But yeah, HTTP is a great one to mention too. It's one that I didn't mention specifically because it's kind of bundled in the same rich binding category. But we try to be very explicit about the way we expose HTTP in the autoproc model to make sure that those limitations are clear and we are not steering customers down the wrong path. The users know, like they have a set of APIs that if you use those APIs, they will all work. They will not be in a state where they are using, for instance, ASP.NET APIs and they don't behave the way you would expect. But our goal is to make sure that we are bringing that capability into the autoproc model to give you access to the same experiences, the same kind of APIs that you're used to with the in-proc model as well.
Gotcha. One thing that I know that some of my team members and developers I've worked with that have talked about when they talk about isolated is that they're already ASP.NET core developers. And I know that the startup has changed a lot when you're using this isolated, and everyone seems to gush all over it because it feels familiar. Can you talk about, I described the traditional, the in-proc one, which is like I have a file with a function and I can add more functions to it. But isolated seems like it sort of changes the game a little bit as far as how the startup or perceived startup may work.
You still have that experience of a file of the class and functions in it, but then it's that extra bit of, you also have the startup wire up that allows you can also do some things a little bit differently if you want to, but you can still have that same sort of experience on the individual function basis.
Okay.
But the project itself is still going to have that bootstrapping. And it absolutely does feel a lot more at home for a lot of .NET folks. Like, you want to set up a middleware pipeline, there's a mechanism for that. It's not an ASP.NET like HTTP middleware pipeline. That is a key distinction there. Like, while we've made it feel much more at home, it's not taking the same sets of APIs in all cases.
Which is a very intentional thing, right?
Yep.
For functions, we support a very wide number of payloads. You may be triggered based on HTTP request, but you may also be triggered based on a new blob that showed up in a container, on a service bus message. And we need to make sure that the middleware pipeline is not HTTP centric. It gives you rich access to an HTTP request if you need that. But it also gives you access to the trigger and the payload information that you have from different workload types. So that's how that pipeline was introduced. It was built to expose exactly that. Which, by the way, we're talking about middleware, but that's actually one of the new things that was introduced with the out-of-proc model, with the isolated model. Was this ability for you to actually introduce a piece of middleware that's going to be in the invocation pipeline and gives you the ability to do some of the same things that you do with traditional ASP.NET Core middleware. But you are absolutely right. Yeah, common like cross-cutting concerns, things that you want to do outside of your function logic prior to the function being executed. But you're right when you talk about the experience is a lot better aligned, I think, with what .NET developers have come to expect when they create a new project in VS. And if you compare what you get when you create one of the projects for isolated, if you compare that to the ASP.NET or a console app, it's very similar. The set of APIs that you end up using when you're registering services and lighting up some of the new capabilities is all based on the generic host. So it feels very familiar to a .NET developer. So we're trying very much to make sure that we are leveraging the existing set of skills that .NET developers are bringing in and not force them to learn a bunch of new Azure Functions concepts.
Got it. Well, let's talk a little bit about, we talked about that, the isolated models available at the end of the V3 lifecycle. In V4 specifically, what are the major highlights that developers need to know about in Azure Functions?
So for V4, if you contrast the in-proc and out-of-proc model, the distinction between the two becomes a little harder for a lot of developers. So it's one of the questions that we see coming to us a lot of times, because when it was first introduced, the out-of-proc model, the easiest answer was to say the reason why you want to go to out-of-proc is so you can use version X of .NET, right? Because
.NET 5 specifically.
.NET 5 specifically at that time, because we didn't have support for .NET 5 in Functions V3. If you wanted to use the latest and greatest, you had to go to the out-of-proc model.
Got it.
The same thing will apply for future versions of .NET that are non-LTS versions. So you should not expect that we will have support for non-LTS releases of .NET with the in-proc model. Just because of the support life cycle there, we would have to essentially introduce a version of functions that supports that particular version of .NET, and almost immediately have to announce deprecation. Make sure the lifetime of that release was very well scoped to the .NET version. So while the in-proc model will only see support for LTS releases, you have the flexibility to move to non-LTS releases with the out-of-product model. That's a lot easier to do there. You are, again, in full control over the version of .NET you use. And moving those versions is significantly simpler than having to retarget to a new major version of functions. You don't have to deal with like 2 sets of breaking changes when that happens.
Got it.
Speaking personally, like I am much more inclined to start playing with non-LTS stuff because I see the path there for, I'm just going to change my target framework when, .NET 8 rolls around. So I can build all my stuff, soon with .NET 7 and be very happy with it and, know that I don't feel like I'm taking a risk there in the same way that I might have previously, at least for me.
Got it. So today, if I want to start with a V4 function, isolated model, like, can I try the .NET 7 previews in it? Like, can I just like flip that on and deploy that into production?
Technically, you won't be able to deploy it into production. That's
Okay.
the key detail because it's not actually running in our infrastructure yet.
Got it.
While it's we'll be lining up a preview window for that, but not there yet. So you can absolutely do it though for like local projects if you want to like spin that up and try it out. Like I think it's a fun experiment and it's a fun way to play with some of the new stuff.
Got it. Okay. So when do you plan? So you said if, as you're moving along, like how is this release cycle different? Because I think I have a very good feeling for the traditional auto-proc or in proc method, but the auto-proc isolated, when do you decide that, hey, now .NET 7's on, .NET 8's on, .NET 9's on?
How do we decide, or how does the customer decide? If somebody just wants to retarget, they can absolutely just do that. For us, it's mostly just a matter of when we can light things up in the infrastructure and have certain sets of validations. I mean, that's the other thing is we're not going to go run and tell you to switch everything to the .NET 7 previews if like some of our templates are going to do something that's weird there. Like we have to validate those, but
that makes sense. And that also means that really, if I'm the type of developer that, wants to feel, safe and sound in the LTS because I want to plan for the 3-year, I have a model that supports that. But then if you're like me, who is, I'm just going to be updating every single one because I want to take advantage of all those changes. Now functions is there for me regardless.
The principle here should be that you're focusing more on your .NET version that you want to write against than the functions version you want to write against.
Yeah, and that's a model that we're trying to move to more and more, is that you don't have to worry so much about the version of functions as much as you do about the version of .NET. That's really ultimately what a .NET developer cares about. And some of the things that Matthew described about the environment, it's all about what we have. If we have the support for .NET lights up as soon as the environment provides that support, right? In this case, we are running on Azure. As soon as .NET bits are available in the cloud environment, there is nothing functions would need to do in order to enable that support. That's the key thing there. You do have the ability to deploy self-contained applications as well. So that's a way to bypass that requirement. And we've had a lot of customers doing that in the past. So we have some documentation that will provide guidance on how to do that. But that just further unlocks some of it just creates a little more flexibility. But it just gives you an example of what customers have the ability to do with that model, which is just something that wouldn't work for the in-proc.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's how that's what I was kind of getting at. So I'm glad we got there, which was, if I really want to do it, I can do it. And I think of that,
yes.
if you think of the .NET website is a great example, is Myra, who runs and owns and works on the .NET website. She is running at any given time, like the LTS version, but also previews. Like you can see on the bottom of the page in A/B testing, like you refresh the page, it's running different versions of .NET because of how it is, because you're able to deploy that way. So it's cool that this model enables those scenarios. Is there anything else before we wrap up here in this amazing conversation of all things Azure Functions, like that developers should know about V4? Any other scenarios or anything else? Obviously, we'll link to all the documentation, the getting started stuff as well. But anything else that you're like, they need to know this?
Well, I mean, just maybe a slight tangent from the the V4 stuff, but I mentioned it actually with the extensions comment earlier and what types you could bind to. Another thing that's happened sort of relatively recently, it's not locked to V4, but we updated a lot of the extensions that are available for the different services you can trigger or bind to. And those all align with the Azure SDKs. So if you're familiar with the Azure SDK for .NET, all of your favorite types are going to be there for your triggers. So triggering for blob and getting a blob client is totally fine. There's a lot of really nice things that come along with that, including being able to connect using identity instead of secret in a connection string. But the fact that you have these, what for me are a much nicer set of types that are a lot more consistent and probably more similar to the code that the .NET community is already writing. So it's just a nice improvement that is just a NuGet upgrade away.
Nice. How about you, Fabio? Any final thoughts? Any final features people need to know about?
I think really some of the key things if we're scoping to V4 and what's new in .NET for V4 is really everything that comes with .NET 6, right? Some of the performance gains that we've seen from the upgrade, a lot of those do translate into the AutoProc model. We're making a lot of investments in AutoProc to leverage things like source generators to make a lot of the things that today require some runtime reflection or some parsing of metadata. A lot of that stuff is moving to build time. So when you deploy that, like we don't have to pay that cost anymore, and we further reduce that cold start impact or that performance impact that we had in the past. But it's really about all of that. A lot of the goodness that came with the .NET 6 is what we've been able to light up in V4.
That's awesome. More flexibility, more power, more productivity, and new versions of .NET whenever I want them is really
that's the key thing. If you look at functions, like the functions history, like we've had a lot of instances where .NET versions were introduced, and it took us a while to adopt some of those new versions. And as well of I think the past couple of releases at this point, we've been able to provide support for a new version of .NET Day 1, which is really our goal, and it continues to be the goal moving forward. Is that particularly with the AutoProc model, you have the ability to take advantage of previews, play around with early bits, and when things hit GA milestone, you have the ability to actually go to prod with those versions on day 1.
Awesome. That's awesome, Nir. Well, Matthew and Fabio, thank you so much for joining me. Well, I have to have you on and other people on the team to do some cool code demos. I still want to understand durable functions one day. We'll get there. There's so much in this world because like I said, I love this stuff. So thank you both for coming on, and we'll have you back soon. And thanks for everyone for tuning in to this episode of On.NET. Now, don't forget, if you're over on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button. If you made it this far, you obviously like the video. You like all three of us. So hit that like button. It helps others learn about Azure Functions and all things .NET. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. So until next time, though, this has been another On.NET. I'm James, and thanks for watching.
Thank you all.